So they planned in the comic an elaborate heist.
A few moments later.
I've got the real Howard the Duck. Let's go. Welcome to Comic Drive with Hauss and Jake. I'm on my way to pick Jake up. I haven't gotten him yet. Comic Drive with Hauss and Jake.
Oh, fuck. You've been sitting here on that for 5 minutes waiting?
I've been recording all the way here.
Howard the Duck.
Howard the Duck. Today we're going to talk about Howard the Duck. And the great Howard the Duck heist.
Okay.
Do you know who Howard the Duck is?
Yes, I know who Howard the Duck
Well,
is.
enlighten me.
He's a duck. I don't know what he's done.
Okay, well, he's from Duck World, which is pretty much like our world, only ducks.
Everybody's ducks.
Is ducks instead of people. And he's created in like Man Thing in the 70s by Steve Gerber. Steve Gerber was very good, and he was like he became synonymous with Howard the Duck. Throughout the 70s, he crafted like what a Howard the Duck story is. Howard the Duck was his creation. Howard the Duck was his baby. And a lot of what people loved about a lot of what people loved about Howard the Duck was Steve Gerber's influence and how Steve Gerber wrote Howard the Duck, right? Because Disney was also like, he looks too much like Donald the Duck, so put some pants on that duck. And Steve Gerber was like, man, I don't want to have to put pants on the duck. And he did it. He created some machine in the storyline called like the Blandinator or something along those lines that like forced Howard to wear pants. So there was meta commentary going on and stuff like that. But Howard the Duck was a fun, good character. So Steve Gerber and Marvel were at odds, disagreeing on creative direction for Howard the Duck and whatnot. And eventually Marvel was like, well, we own Howard the Duck and you don't, so farewell.
Go away.
Yeah, they're like, get out of here. And he worked with Marvel quite a bit. Like, he'd shoe in Howard the Duck where he could. He was working on She-Hulk at one point. He had like a Howard the Duck story, but then he was also disappointed then because they were planning other stuff for Howard the Duck, like a Howard the Duck relaunch, as it were. And he was writing She-Hulk, and he like put Howard the Duck into like 4 issues of that, and there was like no fanfare for it. Marvel didn't do anything to promote those issues or whatever. And then still stuff just fell apart with more censoring and editorship and whatnot. So that Howard the Duck relaunch at that point didn't happen. And then Steve Gerber stopped working for Marvel. This gentleman needs to get out of my lane. Or speed up. Anyway, he was like, well, I'm going to sue Marvel over the ownership rights for Howard the Duck. And that was a thing that Marvel had gone through. They still do ownership rights. It's part of what led to the birth of Image Comics. You know Image Comics?
I think you've told me about them.
Yeah, that was like where Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Lee, like a bunch of the superstar artists. It wasn't quite the same, I guess, but they started Image, and Image is creator-owned. Like Todd McFarlane created Spawn, Todd McFarlane owns Spawn. Image gets some money from printing the comics, but Image doesn't get anything from Spawn. If a Spawn movie is to be made, that's Todd McFarlane's money. Todd McFarlane was a bad example, but like Jim Lee created Wildcats. When there was a Wildcats cartoon made, Image Comics didn't get any money from that. Jim Lee did. Which is why Jim Lee could then take those characters and sell them to DC if he wanted, which he did.
Probably made lots of money.
Oh, I imagine so. Oh, Jim Lee sold a lot of them and just actually bought himself a position at DC. Anyway, Howard the Duck.
Buy yourself work.
Pretty much, he was like, hey, you can have all these characters, and I'm goddamn Jim Lee. He didn't buy himself a writer, he bought himself like an editor position. He secured his future. Good old Jim Lee. He still draws. He drew Hush. Anyway. So, there was all fights over that. Even like Stan Lee and a lot of Stan Lee had legal issues with Marvel, if you believe that or not, at times, and Jack Kirby as well. A lot of people that created these iconic characters were like had zero ownership rights over them. Same thing, Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster didn't really see a lot of money from such an iconic thing. Why are there so many people jaywalking this morning? Anywho, gee whiz. Okay, let's get this quickly. So Steve Gerber's in a lawsuit with Marvel over the rights of Howard the Duck, which he ended up ultimately losing. But at one point, he created a character for Eclipse Comics named Destroyer Duck. And like he co-created this with a bunch of other artists that like helped him, including Jack Kirby. And it says right on the top, like special legal fundraising issue. So he created this duck in a a creator-owned scenario to raise money to battle Marvel. Right? Anyway, still lost. There was a lawsuit and he couldn't discuss it. It was settled out of court. So he still worked for Marvel off and on and stuff like that. And then he's doing stuff over at Image. He was working for something called Strike Force, with a Y, Strike Force. And he was creating this character named something, I can't remember. It was like Specimen X or something. And it was going to be revealed that Specimen X was Destroyer Duck. He was going to bring back Destroyer Duck and have this creator-owned Destroyer Duck and have a run of that. And it didn't work out. It wasn't Rob Liefeld, it wasn't Jim Lee. It was Mark Silvestri, maybe? One of the Image guys was like, oh no, this is because he was writing that comic for him. And he was like, oh, actually, and they both had an agreement. They're like, yeah, this doesn't actually go the way we were thinking. Like a talking duck doesn't go where we want it to. So they opted not to make that Destroyer Duck. And then he was like, oh man, I'm kind of bummed out. I kind of wanted to bring back Destroyer Duck. And he was chatting with Mark Waid, who was the creator of Savage Dragon. And he was like, well, let's do a Savage Dragon Destroyer Duck team up crossover. Why not? And he's like, okay. So he got excited and he's writing that. And it was fucking weird. But at the same time he's writing that, Marvel was like, hey, Steve Gerber, do you want to write Howard the Duck? And he was like, no, I don't. And they're like, oh, come on, we're doing this book called Spider-Man Team Up. Issue number 5, Spider-Man's going to team up with Howard the Duck. And we want you to write it. And he was like, and he was hesitant to do it. Didn't want to go back to work for Marvel. Didn't want to write Howard the Duck just to be pissed on again. And also at the same time, it was about going to be coming out the same time as his Destroyer Duck Savage Dragon crossover, so he didn't want to overshadow that in one way or the other. And Mark Waid was like, actually, do it. And talk to Marvel and see if you could do it under one condition. And they'll never let you do it anyway, so at least you tried. And he's like, what? He's like, well, we'll have like a pseudo crossover. Just say, have the same story running through both of the issues from different sides, and at some point, we could just maybe see a glimpse of Savage Dragon in the Spider-Man comic. We'll see a glimpse of Spider-Man in the Savage Dragon comic, right? Just a pseudo crossover that, they come at something from both sides. And you see both sides of the story. And he was like, yeah, okay. He pitched that to Marvel. Marvel was like, yeah, actually, sure, that's cool. So he's like, oh, cool. And he's writing this comic, which was just weird. You know who Elf with a Gun is?
Elf with a gun?
Yeah, the character Elf with a Gun. His name is like Growth.
Oh, Elf with a gun.
He's an elf with a gun. I don't want to talk anymore about Elf with a Gun. But that's how weird this comic was. Like, the elf with a gun shows up and shoots the ringmaster because he's taken over the circus of crime and he needs the hypno disc and he's got some other thing that he's taken from Savage Dragon, like a little tiny sitar. And he's mind control shenanigans. And yeah, Spider-Man, who was Ben Reilly at the time, and Peter Parker team up when Howard the Duck is also there, and they get to this warehouse to fight the elf with a gun. But then from the other side, Savage Dragon is there with Destroyer Duck. Anyway, so while he's back at Marvel, he hears that this was like a soft reboot to reintroduce Howard the Duck to the world again, because Marvel had all these other plans. There was like Howard the Duck Christmas special coming up, and Howard the Duck was appearing in Generation X of all things. And Steve Gerber was like, oh, okay, like this was just you're using my name to reintroduce Howard the Duck so you can fucking do whatever you want, garbage. And he was sad and dejected and pissed off. And Mark Waid was actually like, hey, keep writing this. I have an idea. So they planned, in the comic, an elaborate heist. So, the comic plays out just the same. Spider-Man and Howard the Duck and Beverly all wind up at this warehouse. They fight with Elf with a Gun in the circus of crime. You see Savage Dragon just from like a few different shots. You never get a clear shot of his face, or if you see his arm, you see his fin. There's a part where Howard the Duck and Destroyer Duck bump into each other and like, wait, what? You're a duck. And shenanigans ensue and everything. They beat the bad guys, and Spider-Man and Howard the Duck and Beverly all leave, and they go on their merry way. And then we see the things from the other side in the Savage Dragon comic, which is just weird. I can't even begin to describe it. The Ninja Turtles were in it at one point. And every time I've heard people talk about this story, I've never heard people mention the Ninja Turtles, and I was like, okay, I did not expect the Ninja Turtles. And I kept looking. I was like, are these the Ninja Turtles, or are these, legally distinct, copyrighted, non-copyrighted versions of the Ninja Turtles? The comic goes exactly the same, except for at one point, Marvel had substituted like the word crap for darn. Other than that, like the overlapping conversation is word for word identical. The exact same thing happened, solidifying that it's the exact same scenario. Except Savage Dragon and Destroyer Duck are in there, and all of a sudden, whoa, you're a duck, when Howard the Duck and Destroyer Duck meet. And the elf with a gun is like, oh man, you want ducks? Here, I have a bunch of ducks. And he like does some magic cloning spell, I don't know. Just a crap load of Howard the Ducks show up. various ducks, actually. There's a duck in a Superman costume, there's just regular ducks, there's a bunch of Howard the Ducks. And Savage Dragon and Destroyer Duck are like, well, let's get out of here. And Destroyer Duck grabs Beverly and Howard the Duck and says, I've got the real Howard the Duck, let's go. And they run out of the warehouse. And Savage Dragon's like, well, shouldn't he go back with his friends that he came here with? And Destroyer Duck's like, nah, he has no friends back there. And it doesn't matter. They grabbed a clone anyway, and they left. They'll never know the difference. I don't know where the clone Beverly came from, but it's fine. So yeah, Strip says, like, I've got the real Howard the Duck. They have a clone. No one will ever know. And they run out. And then more weird stuff happens. And then we come back, and Howard the Duck. There's also a pin-up for Leonard the Duck, which was just that cover from Howard the Duck #1, but it's Leonard the Duck, and he's green, and he's holding a plunger, and a few things are different. And yeah, and they go and like, okay, well, you are now in the witness protection program, and we got to move you. You can't go back to Cleveland, which is where Howard the Duck lives. Like, you got to go to Boston. And they dyed his feathers green and changed his name to Leonard the Duck. And Beverly changed her name to like Rhonda Martini or something. Every Marvel appearance after that was a clone of Howard the Duck that didn't know any difference. Yeah. And I read the Generation X comics game. He was there. It was Howard the Duck. Nothing special. But he was a clone. He didn't know. Midway through this little adventure, he became a clone. And then, unfortunately, Leonard the Duck never appeared again. He appeared one more time in something, and he was just kind of there. And it was written by Steve Gerber. And I thought it would have been great if, and it probably, but like to avoid legal battles, probably, because if Steve Gerber were to create Leonard the Duck and have very similar, exact same things happening in a creator-owned comic, Marvel would have been like, hey. So he didn't win any money from it or whatever, but he stole his character back in the eyes of creativity. And they also, like, there are 2 backup things written. There's like a whole letter by Mark Waid and a whole 3-page thing by Steve Gerber in the Lobo, not the Lobo the Duck, in the Savage Dragon Destroyer Duck crossover. They have these 2 things explaining exactly what they did. They're like, yeah, this is what happened, this is what we did. Marvel, who cares? Marvel's not even going to read this. They don't. I think that's really cool. And then
should make Lobo the Duck.
They did make a Lobo the Duck in Amalgam. It was weird. Other places I've heard people tell this story, they also end the story with, and then Steve Gerber died. They like Steve Gerber stole him and then up and died, so Steve Gerber wins. So this story was in like 1996, and Steve Gerber died in 2008. So yes, Steve Gerber died and won. Apparently, they say he also died penniless, still paying legal fees. But in 2002, between this, Steve Gerber did return to Marvel one more time and wrote 6 issues of Howard the Duck for the Max imprint. And that was a Howard the Duck's return to form. Except he's a mouse. But Howard the Duck he got turned into a mouse for many of the issues because of Disney being like, hey, he looks too much like our duck. So they turned him into a mouse. It's like, are you happy? So he doesn't resemble Mickey Mouse at all. But that was Steve Gerber coming back. That was classic Howard the Duck back. So, I mean, people kind of leave that one out too. But they're like, oh, Steve Gerber died and he won. You know, he died 12 years later, penniless. He had the moral high ground because he stole back his creation. But he also went back and worked for Marvel again. This was under their Max imprint, as you can see by the breasts. I forgot there were movies in that. So it was adult fare. So it was like Steve Gerber kind of just getting to do what he wanted without editorial, without ratings. That's the story of the Howard the Duck heist. You have anything to say? I just kind of rambled through.
You just kind of rambled right through.
I did.
So what happens with the real Howard the Duck?
He just went and lived his life, I assume. Like I said, he appeared one more time and kind of in the background of something. And that was it.
He just left.
Yep. There was no explanation of how they went to different universes or whatever, so I guess it was for that purpose assumed that Savage Dragon was just in Savage Dragon's Chicago is just the same as the New York of Marvel, even though the Ninja Turtles were there and it was weird. But well, how cool would that be if like Steve Gerber finally returns to Marvel to write a Howard the Duck story and he's like, oh, this story isn't in Cleveland where Howard the Duck usually is, this is in Buffalo. Because if it's in Cleveland, it's still admitting that this is the clone, even though it's Max, so it's not really in continuity, so it's kind of its own thing. But it'd just be cool if it was its own thing. There's just one thing where like, oh, you know, I got tired of wearing green feathers, or just something to reference that this is the true Howard the Duck. That's the Howard the Duck heist. I've been Hauss, and he's been
Jake.
Key Biscuit.
Or just biscuits.
Just biscuits. Jakey Biscotti, if you're feeling nasty.
Biscotti?
Sure.
The naughty biscotti?
I don't know. Are you?
No.
Are you naughty, Jake? Subscribe to my channel because I'm Hauss.